This is a DW Fearn VT-4, which is a single-channel vacuum tube equalizer, passive design LC. We call it an LC equalizer. LC stands for inductor capacitor. It's one of the best ways to achieve equalization because it has a much more natural sound than a lot of other techniques. This is somewhat different from most equalizers that you're probably used to using. And it takes a little bit of playing around with it to sort of get the concept of it. Normally, you think of something like this, which has 5 individual bands, we'll call them, and you think of them as boosting and cutting in different ranges and so on. This is a little bit different. If you've used a Pultec equalizer, you probably have some sense of how this works. This is very different from a Pultec, but in some senses it has similar characteristics. The bands go from a low frequency cut to a low frequency boost to a mid frequency cut, high frequency boost, and a high frequency cut. In each of the ranges are several frequencies you can choose from. For example, in the low frequency cut, we can cut at 30, 40, 100, or 400 hertz. And most of the controls are plus or minus 12 or plus or minus 16 dB. When you're using an equalizer like this, it usually makes sense to use these controls together. So if you're looking to create some sort of interesting low-end sound to your to a particular track or to an overall mix, it's often useful to boost the lows here and select a frequency that sounds the best for the project. And then utilizing the low frequency cut and the mid frequency cut, shape that low frequency boost to just the way you want it to sound. The controls need to be used together. If you just use each band independently, you're sort of missing the concept and the potential of this design. The low frequency boost can be boosted at 20, 40, 60, 100, or 140 hertz. And when used in conjunction with the low frequency cut, you can create a great number of different response curves to fit what you're looking for. And if you've ever used this kind of an equalizer on a bass or a bass drum, you'll soon discover that there's things you can do with it that just can't be achieved any other way. In conjunction with the low frequency boost, the mid-range cut is often useful. This is a little different because this has a number of frequencies you can choose from 200 to 700 hertz in 100 hertz steps. And as you turn the amount of cut upwards, the curve goes from being a very shallow, low Q curve to a sharper and sharper curve until when you get all the way up, it's quite sharp and narrow. The low positions here, the 2 and 4 dB steps, are primarily useful to help in shaping that low frequency curve that we talked about. The sharper positions up further are often useful to eliminate sounds in the mid-range that are getting in the way of other instruments. And because you have quite a range that you can select from here, you can usually find one where you can null out something. Personally, I always find that in almost every recording and mix that I've ever done, I always end up cutting just a tiny bit at 400 hertz with this kind of an equalizer because it takes out what I call a mid-range muddle, where everything seems to conflict with each other in there. And sometimes just one notch of this will make the whole mix sound much cleaner. Moving on to the high frequency, again, we have a number of different frequencies that we can select, ranging from 1.5 kilohertz up to 16 kilohertz. And we can also vary the Q in this band. As opposed to the low frequency boost and cut, which are shelving curves, this is a peaking curve. And in its sharpest position, it's still not very sharp by standards of most equalizers. In the broad position, it's quite broad. and quite general in its effect. The lower frequencies in this range are useful for electric guitar and snare drum and so on. The upper ones are really do some magic on a lot of vocal sounds because they add air and just a brightness and cleanness to the vocal sound that you really have to hear, especially on a very broad curve like that. And the last band is a high frequency cut, which has frequencies you can select from 1.7 kilohertz up to 28 kilohertz. And this, again, like the low frequency boost and cut, can be used in conjunction with a high boost in order to shape the curve. So there may be times when boosting at say 10 kilohertz on a vocal gives you a little bit more sibilance than you really want, but by then taking this at 10 kilohertz, which seems counterintuitive to cut it at the same frequency, but remember they're different types of curves, and just cutting this a little bit, you can shape that high frequency response to improve the sound of the vocal. You may be wondering why there's a 28 kilohertz high frequency cut. This was something that was simple to add and has actually turned out to be quite beneficial because a lot of times you can switch in the 28 kilohertz, flip this up a couple of notches, which has very little or no effect audibly on the material, but it makes the anti-aliasing filters in the A to D converters have to deal with a lot less of the high frequency content that might otherwise be there, and can make the overall sound of the digital recording much cleaner than it would be otherwise. Rounding out the VT-4 is an in and out switch, so you can bypass the unit in order to hear what it's doing, and a gain control which has switch selected positions where you can vary the gain in 3 dB steps, which is useful if you're using them in pairs, which is often the case on a stereo bus. And that's the VT-4 equalizer.